Thank you, everyone. So today, I presented on this last week on part of my dissertation research, but last week where I talked about teachers and the story of the network. Today, I'm looking at a different aspect, and I want to focus on the weak links and why ties are important. So I have conducted a social network analysis of 2 English language teachers' Twitter chats. A little bit about me first because I am much like the TikTok experience. I'll explain a bit about me, but what I wanted to share first is a little bit about the outline of my mixed method and ethnographic study. I'll share with you the theoretical framework and the research questions, but the focus, as I said, is on the weak links and the less active users or the lurkers on Twitter. Whereas both chats did provide opportunities for both covert chat participation and overt chat participation, there are some things that are important to notice in the data I collected. One of the things is that there are weak links in the network that are human actants, and how they behave is important. Weak links in terms of the chat hashtag, which is one of the non-human actants, and also weak links and affordances, something else to touch on. So a little bit about me. I'm an English language teacher, I'm an instructional designer, and in 2015, I joined Twitter because of the fear I was missing out on things, and also a feeling that I already knew what I needed to know about teaching. So I was looking for some inspiration. And what I found on Twitter was a community of strangers, people who I did not know, who were willing to help me with, at first, questions about technology, inviting me out to meet face to face when they realized that we were in the same city, even the same school. It also evolved into exchanging recipes. I have a recipe for fruitcake that I use at Christmas time that came from one of my connections in an English language teacher chat. And so my research is really inspired by my initial experiences on Twitter, why I came there and how I behaved. And I was wondering if others experienced Twitter in the same or similar way that I did. The research questions for my study are as follows. How does professional development for English language teachers manifest in Canada under the chat Canadian ELT chat, and in Europe or the UK specifically under SIG tweet on Twitter? To what extent are online Twitter chats different from face-to-face opportunities for chat influencers and chat lurkers? And most definitely the platform has a lot to do with those differences. And to what extent does English language teachers' participation in Twitter chats extend beyond the social media platform and influence their interests, their teaching practice, and their philosophies? So I'm not going to focus on any one of these research questions today, but the findings are touching on a bit of all 3 of them. So here's a brief slide of the context for my research. There are a lot of things that the chats don't have in common. One thing that they do have in common is that they're regularly scheduled and they're English language teacher chats, whereas Canadian ELT chats started 6 years ago and has an established presence in Canada, and also does chat summaries that are public. SIG Tweet began because of COVID and meets a little bit more often. The types of teachers that join both chats also differ. My theoretical framework, so Gahyun today talked about Deleuze and Guattari. I focused on actor network theory in addition to landscapes of practice and post-humanism. And the reason for the actor network theory is because I see Twitter as a way there where, oh, I did not include a slide that I thought I was going to include. I see Twitter as a place where nothing happens until somebody interacts. And so actor network theory focuses on a network being instigated when one actant acts with another. The other thing that I found very important in using actor network theory as part of my theoretical framework is that all the actants, whether they are human or non-human, have the same agency. And I will touch a bit on that today. The research had 4 stages. The first stage was Twitter data extraction. And I was only looking for data that already exists or is taking place, chats that are already taking place. So no one was creating data for me for the purposes of my research. I was just observing and collecting data on existing Twitter chats as they were taking place for a period of 3 months. The second stage included chat analysis. The third stage, I looked at discourse analysis, and the fourth stage was participant interviews. So a brief overview of the interview participants. There were 11 of them in total. Even though you only see 3 from the UK in the figure here, there are 2 residents of Canada who regularly participate, and one moderates the SIG tweet meet. So the flags are based on where they are located, not which chats they participate in. And if you're counting and wondering why there are more than 11 participants below the flags, it's because some people have dual or even more than dual roles in their work in English language teaching. One of the participants identify as male and the remainder identify as female. So if we have in this network graph, this is an example of this is a Canadian ELT chat, and you see all the arrows pointing, the bidirectional arrows pointing to the chat moderator that day. And you can see that this person is very connected to the whole network. So if an inactant or a human or non-human is put into action by another actant, so in this case, the moderator is engaging with everyone by starting the Twitter chat, then a connection is established and the network is created. But some actants in this network, as you can see, are more influential than others in the network. If that actant, the moderator, is removed, then the whole network ceases to exist during this chat, because that moderator is the instigator and the one that most people are responding to. However, today I want to focus on the one person in G7, or examples of that person in G7, where they only use the hashtag to share a piece of information. What influence do those lurkers have? Lurkers in Twitter chats, are they aware of all the opportunities to act on the platform and within that network? And do they perceive the invitation to act in the same way as those who are more influential? I'll come back to the human actants after we take a look at the hashtag as an actant. So one of the weak links that I'm considering, which is not something that most people would consider, is the actual hashtag as an actant. And here what you see is a bar graph. And what I've circled are the days that the chats took place for Canadian ELT chat. And this is the number of times the hashtag has been used during that period of time. So you can see here that Canadian ELT chat is not just a place to meet, it's a community, it's a personal learning network, and it's where people come to share knowledge, to learn, and to take that knowledge learned here and share it elsewhere, perhaps in workspaces, perhaps with other groups on Twitter that I don't always know. But this network shared journal articles, links to conferences and events, information about English language learning websites. And so they engage in Canadian ELT chat, the hashtag, not just to learn and communicate during the chat, but to share their learning within this network and then taking it out of the network. So in contrast to SIG tweet meet, here the chat hashtag is an example of a weak link. I mean, it does bring people together to talk. And in this case now, I've not circled the days of the chats. The days of the chats are not circled. What I've circled are the days when the chats don't take place. And you can see that the hashtag is not used. It's a weak, it's a link, it exists, it's weak, but it's not there for the dissemination of knowledge or information. There could be many reasons for this. The network here isn't weak, the SIG tweet meet network. Most of the participants do know each other. And I discovered in the interviews from the chat moderators that they knew each other before the chat began. So the network exists in other spaces other than Twitter, and this is just one of their meeting places. And perhaps the sharing happens in other places. But it's important to notice that the two chats behave differently, and the weak links are important to observe. Another element of the power of weak links is the dissemination of knowledge and the importance that a weak link, like that person in that graph that I showed you, where they just use the hashtag to share information, what role they play in the dissemination of information and the building of already large links. So if you have just a participant in the chat who is simply retweeting or just sharing and not speaking during or chatting during a chat, you might assume that they are not learning, or you might assume that they are not participating or doing anything. But what in fact they're doing is, first, they're raising the profile of retweeting information, and they're retweeting not to the network of Canadian ELT Chat or SIG Tweet but to a different network, because weak links don't have the same ties to the big Canadian ELT Chat community that, let's say, the moderator does. The moderator is probably connected to a lot of the same people that other influencers are. But the weak links come and join. Sometimes they engage, sometimes they don't, but they're using the hashtag as a way of disseminating knowledge, but also taking that knowledge and sharing it to their own. So whereas we might not see automatically where they're sharing their information, their network, their personal learning network, is different from the larger network. And how new people join the chat is most often because of these weak links.
5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Yasid. So here, another example of weak links is that needs control the perception of affordances. And many influencers use the platform as TikTok, you know, also they use their platform effectively and get followers and become popular, but needs control the perception of affordances. So this research participant is aware of the platform opportunities to act, but is also aware that not all the actions are possible to them. And in this case, it's because of their job precarity. They're very concerned about what their employer might say about them engaging on Twitter with information that might not be exactly English language teacher oriented. In this case, they were talking about a political situation. So they're prevented from engaging, not because they aren't aware of all the actions that are possible to them, but they're aware of all the actions that are not possible to them because of their job precarity. So the Twitter environment doesn't provide them with the same affordances. It provides the chat moderators, for example, or those who use the platform to promote themselves. Another weak link that I noticed was the use of hashtags that aren't in the chat, but the hashtags that are important to participants. So because we're running a little short on time, I'll just allow you to take a look at all the different topics that the interview participants find important to list as hashtags, whether it is on their bios on Twitter or whether it was during the interviews. These are topics that were important to them or topics that they are following. And why I consider these to be weak links: they are beyond the area of expertise for English language teachers, many of these topics, but in these other networks where they're exploring these topics, they are silent, but listening, and also bringing that knowledge back to SIG Tweet Meet and Canadian ELT Chat during chats or using the hashtag for disseminating information. So you might be interested in how the two chats operate. So I've included the slide. Basically, Canadian ELT Chat is used not just for Twitter chats, but is used for disseminating information. And it does attract a larger number of participants to the chat, but the connections are across a larger network, and the network is not as intimate as SIG Tweet Meet. They do attract new chat participants, but there's very little small talk, and they engage on the topic that's being discussed during the chats. Whereas SIG Tweet Meet is not used as a hashtag to disseminate information, but it is used to connect people who already know each other for the most part. They do invite others to join in, but it doesn't attract large numbers. The network is tighter, and the small talk and the communication is a combination of small talk and topics. In terms of topics, the most important topics that I took note of during the period of my data collection that both chats touched on was intersectionality, race and queerness in ELT, representation, and sustainability in ELT and ELT materials, in addition to topics that were related to the pandemic. Thank you very much.